Slack is a new way to communicate with your team. Messaging that's faster, better organized, and more secure. Conversations happen in channels that are easy to create, join, and search. Try it for free at slack.com. Slack, where work happens.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 343. If you thought that you were the only one who thought that Ghislaine Maxwell came off unhinged, easily provoked, and rather ridiculous in that deposition, do not worry. You are not the only one. In our article today, we're going to hear from a forensic psychologist who has a few things to say about Ghislaine Maxwell's behavior during the deposition. Now look, I understand. I'd be agitated too if I was being accused falsely of crimes. I'd freak out, honestly. So I could understand being a little bit agitated during the deposition. But what I don't understand is if you're innocent and you have nothing to hide, then why are you pleading the fifth so often? Why are you not answering questions directly? And why are you being abrasive? Just answer the questions and move on with your life. If you're innocent, you should be chomping at the bit to answer these questions. Not ignore them, not plead the fifth, and not try and hope that people will forget about what occurred. And that is what the Joe Exotic of the Windsor family should be doing right now as well. Instead of hiding behind Mummy's skirts, he should be speaking with investigators. But what we have seen with all of these people who were surrounded Jeffrey Epstein, all of these people have the same story. Oh, I wasn't really close to Jeffrey Epstein. And then when it comes out that they were close to Jeffrey Epstein, well, it was only a business relationship. And then they just keep piling excuse upon excuse upon excuse and never, ever answer any real questions. Our article today is from Insider.com. Headline, Ghislaine Maxwell comes off as easily provoked in her blockbuster 418-page deposition, forensic psychologist says. This article was authored by Jacob Shamsian. Well, she's not wrong about the way Ghislaine Maxwell came off in that deposition. It was a bad look for her, right? I mean, she came off looking terrible. Just like when her good friend, best friend, pal in the world, Jeffrey Epstein, had his deposition. Another guy who came off looking like an absolute moron. If you're innocent, well, let us all know how innocent you are. Tell us under oath, don't avoid answering the questions, and then back it all up with some receipts. In lieu of that, there's zero chance I'm going to believe anything that comes out of these people's mouths. Ghislaine Maxwell's blockbuster 418-page deposition, taken in 2016 and made public last week, shows the Jeffrey Epstein associate, co-conspirator, fellow child abuser, general all-around scuzzbag and bipedal serpent, bristling and appearing easily provoked at key moments, according to a forensic psychologist. Look, I get why someone would be a bit agitated at a deposition like this, right? It's pretty, extensive stuff, 7 hours, et cetera, et cetera. A little bit of agitation should be expected. But the way that Ghislaine Maxwell went about it, the way she avoided all questions, pleaded the fifth, smashed her hand down on the table, knocking a laptop down, all of that, all of the histrionics just points to her not being very truthful and her trying to attempt to be so mad that she's there and how dare you even have me here. And it was all part of the plan, all part of her extensive cover. And she's just, she likes to manipulate situations. And she thought she'd be able to do that same thing during this deposition. She thought she'd be able to manipulate all of the facts and only pass off her narrative. What she didn't realize was that Sigrid McCauley wasn't playing around, and that Sigrid McCauley was there to do work. Cynthia Calkins, a clinical forensic psychologist and an associate psychology professor at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York, told Insider that, for someone who had years to prepare with her lawyers, Maxwell appeared surprisingly irritable at some of the questions she received. Yeah, look, again, it's not like you or I, right? If we were going to get one of these depositions, we wouldn't have any prep time, really, for the most part. I mean, we don't have the money. I'm guessing most of us don't have the money anyway. I shouldn't say we. I'm guessing most of us don't have the money to pay 3 or 4 lawyers $2,000-$3,000 an hour the way Ghislaine Maxwell was doing. And she should have been properly prepped for this deposition. She should have been ready to go. She should have had all of her answers polished, and she should have been truthful. But when you're not innocent, when the truth is not on your side, it's very hard to do that. There's a surprising amount of snappishness, Calkins told Insider. She appears to be easily provoked in a way that I don't think I would if I had the money or if our lives were on the line. Absolutely not. I would not be that provoked either, especially if I was the I word, innocent. I would go in there very calm, collected, answer the questions that needed to be answered, and then I would go about my life. But that's not what occurred here. She was combative, she was standoffish, and she didn't provide hardly any answers to any of the questions. And when she did provide answers, it was because she was being prodded to do so. The deposition was taken as part of a lawsuit brought by Virginia Roberts, who has accused both Maxwell and Epstein of abusing her in a wide-ranging sex trafficking ring. Maxwell was deposed for 7 hours in 2016, forced to answer intimate questions about her life with Epstein and whether she groomed young girls for sexual abuse. And we know now, with hindsight as our guide, that Ghislaine Maxwell was obviously lying in that deposition when she answered any questions of means, or else she wouldn't have been charged with perjury. So again, it just goes to show you that any time that she tried to answer a question, she had to lie about it because she's guilty. And when she didn't answer questions, well, she pleaded the fifth, which is her right. But it certainly doesn't put a line under anything. It certainly doesn't take the pressure off of you from the standpoint of you seeming to be evasive. Because remember, if she was innocent, don't you think she'd be screaming it from all of the rooftops everywhere in the world? Don't you think instead of hiding for the last year, she would have came out and faced this head on? No, that's not what she did. She hid, she skulked, and, well, now, here we are. The transcript was kept under seal for 4 years until Roberts' lawyers, as well as the Miami Herald, successfully sued to have it released in light of the federal charges against Maxwell. In much of it, Maxwell deflects questions and repeatedly calls Roberts a chronic liar. That is for sure. Ghislaine Maxwell sure loves to throw that liar label around. Considering that she is a bipedal serpent with a forked tongue, it's pretty ironic that she likes to label others liars. We all know that every time she's opened her mouth about this case, it's pretty much been a lie. So it's expected to see her using projection here and to call everybody else exactly what she is. Calkins, who has also written a number of books and scholarly works on sexual abuse, cautioned that we can't read into Maxwell's guilt based on how she appears in the deposition transcript alone. No, of course not. Absolutely not. Look, I would never just use one piece of evidence in a case as serious as this, in a case with such wide-ranging effects around the world. This is the kind of case where you need to have receipts. You need to have a real clear-cut path. And that is exactly what we have. All this does is it adds more context to the profile that's already been built of Ghislaine Maxwell. It just adds more to it, right? This isn't alone what you look at and say, oh, well, that deposition, she's definitely guilty. It's when you add it up with everything else that we know, and you look at how much she has lied, how much she has been evasive, and how much she has gotten away with, and you add to it the fact that she refused to answer all of these serious questions under deposition and under oath, well, it just goes to show you, in the grand scheme of things, that it's obvious that Ghislaine Maxwell is not innocent. If she was so innocent, then why is she part of that non-prosecution agreement in the first place? These are highly charged circumstances, and it's not unusual that anybody in this situation comes off as irritable and defensive, and guarded, and careful when you've got attorneys trying to pick apart your words like that, she said. You or I or anybody who's sitting there for 7 hours is probably going to show some irritability, some defensiveness, some carefulness. Well, I don't know about the defensiveness, but I would definitely be careful with what I said. And as far as irritability goes, that would all depend, probably. I'd probably be more irritated at myself that I put myself in this situation than the circumstances that came of it. But I guess that's just me. And again, I wouldn't have been hiding for the last year or bunch of years. I would have been out there letting it be known that I am innocent of the charges that are put against me, and especially if I had the money of these people. Forget it. I'd be having full-page editorials taken out in the New York Times, etc., etc. But none of these people have done that. All of these people have hidden from this time and time again. None of them have stood up, manned up, or womaned up. All they have done is lie, obfuscate, and hope it goes away. At the same time, Calkins said, Maxwell's defensiveness made it seem like she had something to hide. Yeah, you think? I mean, in other breaking news, water is wet. My own read of it, she does seem to be hiding something, she said. What's she hiding? Who knows? Well, I have a pretty good idea that it has something to do with a sex trafficking ring, as well as a bunch of other stuff. As you all know, I am definitely 100% on the ship that's sailing of the financial crimes here, too. I think that there was an epic amount of financial crimes committed by Epstein and those around him, and as well as the sex trafficking charges. I would really love to see some serious, stiff charges that revolve around their activities with money laundering and these shell companies. That would be fantastic. Maxwell seems like she doesn't think she could be questioned at all, according to Calkins. Maxwell is currently in a federal jail in Brooklyn, under indictment on sex trafficking charges, as well as a perjury charge for answers she gave in this deposition. So again, the prosecutors believe that this deposition is truthful enough that they charged her with perjury for her behavior while she was being deposed and for the answers that she gave them. So that goes to also show you the validity of the accusations made by Virginia and the other survivors. If the prosecutors are believing that Ghislaine Maxwell perjured herself in this deposition, then you would think that they believe all, if not most, of the stuff that is being said about Ghislaine Maxwell. The deposition was at one point scheduled to have taken place in 2009, but had been delayed for another 7 years. Calkins pointed out that it was surprising to see Maxwell lose her cool, given that she had so much time to prepare with her lawyers. Imagine having 7 years to prepare for this deposition, and you still come off looking like a pedantic child? So much for so-called polite society, right? What a bunch of losers. What a bunch of fake face-wearing MFers. She described Maxwell, the socialite daughter of British tycoon Robert Maxwell, as someone who was probably not used to being challenged. Yeah, that's a fact. These people were never challenged. And Ghislaine Maxwell, as we know, was a co-boss with Jeffrey Epstein. She wasn't an employee. She was running the operation right along with him. So she was always giving orders out to the Core Four, and those orders were expected to be carried out and never challenged. These people, they don't like being challenged. They don't like being corrected. And they certainly don't like when they're proven to be wrong. It's certainly possible that she's feeling rather entitled or doesn't think she should be subjected to these questions at all, Calkins said. She's coming from a very privileged background that she's probably not had to deal with a lot of people challenging in her throughout her life in this way, and has probably been used to getting what she wants. That is 100% a fact. Ghislaine Maxwell is not used to being challenged. She's not used to people telling her the two-letter word no. That's absurd. When you have this much money, you have this much power, the last thing people do is ever tell you no and sit down for a deposition? That is so below me. How dare you even think that I would sit down for a deposition with you? That's how they think, that's how they feel, and unless they're compelled to do so, these assholes will never do anything. In much of the deposition, Maxwell calls Roberts a liar, categorically denying she took part in any inappropriate sexual relationship. That is hilarious to read. It is just so ridiculous that Ghislaine Maxwell would think that anybody would believe what she has to say right now. And remember, we're not talking about one person's word against Ghislaine Maxwell. We're talking about literally dozens of people who have come forward. We're not talking about a 20-year-old guy who had relations with a 17-year-old girl or a 20-year-old girl who had relations with a 17-year-old guy. We're talking about people at the highest levels of power who use that power to manipulate these young girls and force them into a sex trafficking situation. She bristled in responses to questioning about recruiting girls for massages, Calkins said. Roberts and federal prosecutors allege Maxwell used those massages as a segue for sexual abuse. 100. That was to normalize it. Oh yeah, it's just a massage. And then every time you come over for a air quote massage, well, you know what the deal is. Jeffrey Pagliuca and Laura Menninger, the two Maxwell attorneys who represented her in the deposition, didn't immediately respond to insiders' request for comment. That's a shock, huh? The last thing they want to do is open their yaps. They're up against it anyway. It's hard enough to defend a client that you know is guilty, but even harder if she starts opening her mouth or you start opening your mouth, right? So expect them not to say shit. Maxwell was also questioned at length about her relationship with Epstein, whom she closely associated between the early 90s until some point in the mid-2000s, way later than that. In the deposition, Robert's lawyer asked Maxwell whether she considered herself Epstein's girlfriend. She was not his girlfriend. I'm sorry, I don't believe any of that stuff, folks. I haven't seen anything to prove that. Sure, people have said it, but when we're dealing with these sort of assets, these sort of people who are engaged in spycraft, how can we believe that that was just not the cover story for them getting together to get this whole entire thing kicked into gear? That's a tricky question, Maxwell answered. I would have liked to think of myself as his girlfriend. Well, I like to think of myself as a gajillionaire, all right? That would be nice, but it doesn't make it a reality. And you were not his girlfriend either, Ghislaine. Nice try. Calkins said her response suggests Maxwell may be bitter about how her relationship with Epstein ended. The only thing she's bitter about is that the operation ended. It's not about Epstein. It's about the fact that the operation was no longer chugging along. It implies that maybe she wasn't his girlfriend, or maybe he thought of this differently, she said. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but if it was clear from both sides that they were girlfriend and boyfriend, and that was without question, she would not have responded in that way. For sure. Because they were never boyfriend and girlfriend. That was never the case. They were business associates put together by Maxwell and later on people like Wexner. That's what occurred here. And the whole entire object was to compile blackmail dossiers on people of wealth and people of power, and they did it very well. It seems like she's kind of bristling about something in that response, Calkins added. Whether it's because she wanted to be his girlfriend and she wasn't, at least by lack of his desire, or whether she's feeling a little snarky about this or bitter over something that ended. I think that it's a fact that she wasn't his girlfriend at this point, at least from what we have went through. And I mean in a traditional sense his girlfriend, somebody you love, somebody you're willing to do anything for, somebody who shares every secret in your life, etc., etc. That was not Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. They were partners, they were business associates, and the two of them conspired to run one of the biggest child sex trafficking operations in the history of the United States of America. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All of the links that go with this episode can be found in the description box. All right, everybody, we'll be back later on. Hope you all have a fantastic night.